There we go. Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the Finance Committee for Tuesday, March 17th. And if the clerk would please call the roll.
Councilmember Liu.
Here.
Councilmember Burt.
Here.
Chair Lowing.
Here.
All present.
Okay, thank you. Welcome to the very first Finance Committee meeting. I'm looking at our CFO for 2026. And as always, we have a boatload of stuff to do. Kicking off with the utilities, 3 items on utilities this meeting. Before we get into that, I just want to take one minute to talk about, in the context of utilities, sort of what we're trying to do and what we might want to look at. Obviously, we want to do a financial plan so that we have a very well operating set of utilities, and that produces very high level of service for our users, our residents, at what I'll call a reasonable price. And so that's sort of the overall plan here. The 3 of us have our customers as being all the users, commercial and residents. And as we know, they're appropriately highly sensitive to rates and increased rates. So that's always a guide to us, particularly in terms of whatever we do, we message correctly. And I say correctly, meaning exactly that, not overblowing it or underselling it or anything. So I'm sure that'll be the game plan. One of the things that goes through the budgets and the utility budgets that's in the staff report is the whole issue of reserves. And the whole issue that we've talked about in prior, even 2 years ago, we talked about this when I was on the Finance Committee. Utilities Commission has talked about this, about reserves for each utility and all utilities in total. And we know that our outside auditor is doing a report on that right now, and the staff report says that'll be ready in spring of this year. Feels like spring to me. So do we know exactly when that's going to be coming?
Thank you for that question, Chair. Kylie Nose, Assistant City Manager. Staff and the Auditor's Office are actively reviewing drafts of the report. So once the drafts are finalized and a management response is drafted, we'll agendize it for policy and services. So I suspect it will come up before the council break.
Okay, great. And then there's always a trade-off in budgets between, capital budgets and operating budgets. And we all know that that's a way to fix things, but it's not a permanent fix. So that's embedded in this first set of reports as well, the use of funds for capital. And then another thing that is here, and I think it's clearly pertinent to this, but the solution is not short-term. And that is the SFPUC kind of is our source of all water. And they pretty much in that regard run a monopoly, and we're feeling the pain from that. So we could talk about that a little bit in the context of one of these reports, but we might decide to do with the Finance Committee or UAC or both some side conversations with folks to try to move that along, get a little bit more leverage, which we don't have right now. So with those intros, we'll turn it over to our star attraction here who's leading this. So go ahead.
Would you like to take public comments now?
On the first item?
I believe it's proceeding.
We have general public comment.
Okay, sorry.
We do not have any requests to speak for general public comment.
Yes, Lisa Belier here, Assistant Director, Resource Management and Utilities Department. And I'd like to introduce Eric Wong, Resource Planner. He's going to be presenting about the wastewater financial plan.
Hello, good afternoon, Finance Committee members. My name is Eric Wong. I'm a resource planner for the Utilities Department. I'm here to present the FY 2027 wastewater collection utility financial forecast and proposed rate changes. I'll also mention that Karin North and Aaron Gilbert are here from Public Works, and they can here to assist and talk about items related to the treatment plan. Next slide. The proposed rate adjustment for the wastewater collection utility is a 16% increase in FY 2027, which translates to approximately $10.70 for the typical residential customer. This increase is primarily driven by funding Palo Alto's share of the rebuild of the aging treatment plant and for the purpose of complying with increasingly stringent wastewater discharge regulations. We are also restarting the 5-mile sewer replacement project in FY28. Other factors include higher CIP costs, including several one-time CIP projects, and the replenishment of the CIP reserve, which is currently depleted. The table shows the current rate trajectory in bold, and we are projecting the same rate trajectory for FY27 and 28. But due to updated cost and revenue assumptions, the current projection projects one additional rate increase for FY29 through FY31. Staff has listed a few uncertainties that could have cost pressures in the future, but some of these items are highly uncertain and are not included in this forecast. Finally, the wastewater collection utility currently has a $3 million loan from the fiber utility, and we plan to repay this loan with interest by the end of FY26. I also want to mention that the staff presented the wastewater collection utility rate proposal to the UAC on March 6th, and the UAC voted 6-1 to recommend that the City Council adopt a resolution approving the 16% rate increase. Next slide. Here are the 2027 proposed budget reductions from utility department-wide budget refinement and improve efficiencies. Here are some of the items, and the quantity list is for applicable for wastewater only, and these are annual reductions. Next slide. Staff has prepared two bill comparisons. We have our normal, typical community average comparison, but we also want to mention, show this chart from the Silicon Valley Clean Water that shows that Palo Alto rates compared to other cities in the peninsula, and we are on the lower end of the spectrum. But let's move forward. I can talk about our rates compared to our neighboring cities. Next slide. So under current rates, Palo Alto residential customers are paying about 12% below our typical neighboring community average. But we are higher on the commercial and residential for customers. And for Mountain View, and I want to mention Mountain View and Los Altos are treatment partners of the Regional Water Quality Control Plant. Next slide. This chart outlines the key drivers of the FY27 rate increases. Approximately 2.8% is attributable to higher treatment costs. 3.6% reflects increased CIP expenses, and 9.6% is for replenishing the CIP reserve, which is currently depleted. Next slide. This slide shows the cost and revenue projections. The gray text shows the preliminary rate projections, and the green text shows the current rate projections. I want to mention in early years, around 2022 to 24, expenditures exceeded revenues due to two main drivers. There was a multi-year decline in commercial revenue, mainly due to COVID, and we had higher CIP costs in FY24 due to the acceleration of a sewer replacement project by 1 year to align with Caltrans street paving on El Camino. Due to these drivers, the operation and CIP reserve were exhausted in FY23 and FY24, which I will show in the next slide. Next slide. This chart shows the operation reserve projections. The reserve level is projected to be between the reserve minimum and reserve target throughout the forecasting period. The operation reserve in 23 and 24 was very low, and the collection utility had to defer a sewer replacement project. Next slide. This slide shows the CIP reserve projections. The reserve is currently, this slide shows the CIP reserve projections, and the reserve is currently depleted, and we will begin contribution to the CIP reserve starting in FY27. FY28 and FY30 are construction years of the sewer replacement projects, which will draw the reserve below reserve minimum, but will recover in non-construction years. Next slide. Here are the key messages that we plan to undertake to engage our customers regarding these rate increases and the typical outreach channels. I would like to mention that we provide an annual Prop 218 notice to our with our rate changes to our customers, and customer will receive this letter by the end of April this year. Next slide. And with this, the UAC and staff recommends that the City Council adopt a resolution approving the FY27 wastewater collection utility financial forecast and amending the rate schedule as listed. This is the end of the presentation. We welcome your feedback and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Eric. And I just would like to just also add that in addition to staff, we also have an appointed member from the UAC here, Commissioner Phillips, and he's available to support the Finance Committee's decision today.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that. Do you want to make any comments now or at the end of each item? What now? Yeah, break it up, but maybe if you have any overviews of your recommendations on each upfront would be good. And then we'll go to public comment on each of the items.
On this item, we didn't have much discussion. It did pass, I think, 6-1. The one concern, I mean, I would say two concerns. One is just the magnitude of the rise. It's quite high. Most of it is not within the utilities per se, but in public works and what's going on with the treatment plant. Second concern, which I think would be addressed more even with the water side, is our reserve policy is not always particularly clear. There's concerns that potentially we're over reserving, given that for many purposes such as bond ratings, all the reserves for the utility are considered together, yet we have these individual pots. So we're looking very much forward to the study by the auditor, which I understand is not an audit, but a study to help understand, where do these numbers come from and what they mean. So the one commissioner who voted against this, I polled them about the reason why. They said one is lack of visibility into the main elements of the rise in costs. Again, not necessarily utility rise. And secondly, the lack of visibility into the reserve requirements.
Okay. Thank you. See you soon.
Maybe I'll stay here.
You can, that's fine. Do we have public comment on this item?
We do not have any requests to speak on item 1.
Okay. Then we'll move to comments from the committee.
Thank you. Things look essentially reasonable. I realize we have competitive rates. I realize we should expect increases well beyond inflation given our CIP projects and the regional treatment plant. I do have many novice questions, so hopefully you can bear with me in my first Finance Committee meeting. Well, reserves was actually probably the biggest piece there as a sort of significant driver of the overall rate increase. So I'm hearing about the study. I understand that the study is coming. I think I will probably defer my questions about reserves. There may be a rate increase this year due to reserves, but that's something we can rectify. I definitely agree with the sentiment that we should look at reserves across all utilities, especially since these utilities have uncorrelated risks, and sort of following full best practices for each reserve is probably being overly safe. Just commenting on the report, I found the 2027 proposed budget deductions interesting and somewhat limited as a percentage. I think less than 1% of the total revenue. So I'm curious, were there any other deductions that were discussed on the radar, but not ready to roll out in 2027? Or yeah, any other comment from staff about the proposed budget deductions?
Thank you for the question. Dave Yen, Utility Strategic Business Manager. I think we are vetting some other ideas, but they haven't been fleshed out yet. These are more like citywide or department-wide reductions we're looking at, or efficiencies even. But the ones that we have identified are certain, and those are structural changes that we can definitely move forward in FY27. But we are still refining our budgets and seeing what other kind of opportunities are out there. So unfortunately, there's not much I can tell you right now, but there's like some staffing, facilities, maybe relocation. Trying to think of other ones. And then we're also looking at capacity fees for wastewater. That will
Okay.
help some revenues in the future. We are doing some cost of service study.
Okay.
So something like that.
Okay. Well, I was actually going to ask this in the next item about water, since the administration ran customer service costs for water are significantly higher than wastewater. But how does that work administratively and operationally? Do we have, I mean, I know we have a dedicated customer support budget, for example, for wastewater. Is that a dedicated customer support team, or is that co-staffed with the other utilities? Like, yeah, I'm mainly just curious about this item, leverage internal resources between departments, and whether that 15K could actually be higher through things like customer support.
So we are, in a way, blessed in that we are a full service utility. So a lot of the customer service programs we are shared across all the different utilities. Like our customer call center here on the second floor, they do answer all calls, including refuse and storm drain. So those shares are allocated across all the different utilities. In regards to leveraging, what we're also talking about is looking for other city departments. Like for instance, we have city clerks here helping us in our UAC meetings now. So we're using some of those staff when they're available. So instead of trying to fill in another vacancy, we're trying to leverage other available resources within the city. We're hiring professional services, having more legal folks allocated to us sometimes as needed.
Okay. I mean, just squeezing in a comment between the questions. I mean, I think in a year where efficiency is a top level priority, I think this concept of leveraging internal resources between departments and between utilities is really important. And I imagine there have to be more opportunities with space, with, I don't know, customer service software, with other sort of improvements that may span multiple years, but I'd expect could give us more than the, I think I did quick math, like 0.6% of our revenues savings. I think we should be able to find more like over the course of the year. Maybe another question about the top line budget. How are we examining and planning for vacancies given these rate increases? I think the report said that costs were $700,000 less than expected this past year, largely due to vacancies. Is that right? And so have we taken a critical look at the vacancies and whether any should be closed or consolidated, or any, small reorganizations that could make that more efficient?
I'm not exactly clear. 700,000, is that for the wastewater or for all utilities? Do you think? I know.
Okay, on the report side, it said on the expense side, FY 2026 costs are projected to be $700,000 lower than prior forecast.
Councilmember, could you reference a packet page so staff could follow along?
That is page 4 on the report for the first item. Sorry, I don't have the full.
Nope, all good. Packet page eight.
Well,
Yep, it's packet page eight. Yeah.
yes, and then just doing a control F for that point. Okay.
Yes.
I'm trying to read. There was a, and then below it says staff used the adopted budget as a baseline, ... which has slightly. Oh, okay. Maybe I misread that sentence about the slightly reduced projected labor costs. Well, at any rate, maybe that's a more general question. How are vacancies potentially affecting rates for wastewater?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thanks for highlighting this area. What we did in order to develop the forecast is use the adopted budget, and as it mentions here, that we use our best judgment and using, either the most recent recorded information or the adopted budget. In this case, we're using the adopted budget as the baseline and then escalating from there. Sorry, can you repeat the part of your question?
How do vacancies affect our rate increases?
Yeah.
Presumably, we fully budget for all of the roles, and so we might get some money back at the end of the year if we have vacancies.
If there are vacancies beyond what is included in the forecast, then that will be realized in the actual numbers, and the cost will be lower than what's forecasted. So it all hinges on, this section here is we're trying to compare what we think is going to happen in 26 compared with what we forecasted last year. And so, that's something that we can go and take a closer look at. That's a good point that you brought that up.
Yeah.
That we're expecting it to be 700,000 lower this year, and we can look at the method that we use to forecast that. But right now, our best estimate of what we think is going to happen in 2027 is based on the adopted budget for 2026 escalated through 27.
Okay.
I could speak specifically to wastewater vacancies. There aren't that very many right now. So right now we don't have a lot realized into the budget. It is one of the smallest funds, probably next to fiber. It's probably the second smallest fund we have. So it's pretty much fully staffed.
Okay. So probably not the big issue, or probably not the big driver of that 700,000 that I misread, but potentially a factor in other utilities. Okay. And maybe my last question for now, can you talk more about the $3 million loan from the fiber fund? And assuming that there is no burning need in the fiber utility, why not extend or defer the loan payments?
We're not expecting to need to. The reason that we borrowed those funds originally was because we had a shortage of cash as a result of, as Eric mentioned, the moving a CIP main replacement project up a year, and then having our costs higher than we expected and our revenues lower than we expected, got into a situation where we needed to borrow these funds. However, when we look at the projection for the end of 26 and going forward, not only do we have a formal loan agreement that says that we need to repay the funds this year, but also we don't expect to need those funds to address our cash any longer beyond the end of this year.
Okay, yes. And I understand that you have to keep things sanitized and you can't just permanently use fiber money to of course, pay for the wastewater capital. But there's some interesting financial engineering here that we've already embarked on, and I'm curious. And maybe that's a bigger conversation for later about how to redo the reserves or how to think more broadly about loans between utilities. So thank you.
So if I might just for the full committee's sake, Chair, note a couple things. One, as we're moving through the rates, it's 100% appropriate and helpful to hear the committee's comments about efficiencies. And what I'd like to share with the committee is that staff is moving through how we refine talking about that, sharpening up our pencils on the examples. And so I do expect staff to be more equipped to have some of those deeper dive questions as part of your budget conversations in May, as we are actively sharpening our pencils on those activities. As an example, Lou brought up the consolidating spaces. It is something that we're working on. Consolidating is one of the priorities. The physical move and spaces. You wouldn't necessarily see that in the financials of this because we would be charging utility rent. And so that's one of the reasons why in this specific presentation that was very focused on rates wouldn't show an efficiency effort like that because financially there isn't a monetary or a significant enough monetary change. So I just want to recognize that so that you don't feel too disappointed if this is a little bit more focused on the rates, the assumptions that go into the rates versus operational changes. But like I said, I think your feedback is helpful so we can make sure we are prepared for those budget conversations in May.
Pat?
Thank you. So why don't I start by continuing on the in the section that George was talking about on it's the overview section. And I want to make sure that I understood some things. The first 4 lines have to do with FY26, which appear to be 4.1 million to the positive over projections. Is that correct? 700,000 lower expenses and 3.4 million higher revenue. And that revenue driven by a Valley Water grant. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So then the next sentence says, while costs are projected to be about 1.7 million higher, everything that follows from there, well, no, until we get back in, that's FY27 you're referring to in that sentence, correct? The projection? It's not FY26 completion?
I will double check, but I believe we're still referring to 2026, where we're projecting out through the end of this current year, current fiscal year. But yeah, that could be more clear.
The sentence before says the expenses are projected to be 700,000 lower than the forecasts. So how could they then be expenses that's wastewater collection and treatment, right?
If you'll give me a moment, I'd like to double check that for you to make sure I give you an accurate answer.
Okay. All right. There's a lot packed in those 2 paragraphs, particularly that first one. And I've read it a couple times and it's really important, and yet I'm having trouble following it. Okay, so while you're doing that, let me see if I can ask a couple other questions. This is maybe more a question for Karin, but in the introduction, there was a reference to part of the cost increase for treatment is related to new discharge regulations. And can anyone just summarize what those additional discharge limits or regulations are that?
My name's Aaron Gilbert. I'm the plant manager. So essentially what's happening is the total amount of nitrogen that we're allowed to discharge into the bay has been reduced significantly. And so the major driver for the largest project that we're doing currently, the secondary treatment upgrade, STU, is driven at removing nitrogen from our discharge.
Okay, thank you. And what? No, that was in the introduction that it was referenced. And maybe, I don't know if you'll be the best to answer this, but related to those cost increases, we've at the bottom of the first page of the packet, we had the comparison that, and it was also provided to us in the tables of how we do compare to neighboring communities. And with the collection forecast at a 16% increase in FY27 will be approximately 2% above neighboring communities, assuming they don't have any increases. So if they're also going through these changes on treatment technologies due to mandates, are they going to have roughly similar increases, even if we don't know exactly what those are?
The short answer is yes.
Okay, that makes me feel better. Misery loves company. So, okay, thank you. And then my other questions, or the other remaining question before getting back to the one I had beginning, can someone summarize both the purpose and the scope of the auditor's review of reserves? How much of it is looking at consolidation and how much of it is other issues?
I think they look at a couple of different things. The first one is a benchmarking with other neighboring cities and best practices, and then the number of types of reserve buckets we have, and comparing what our reserve names are to what other benchmark cities and best practices are, and also the number of days with amounts of the reserve level should be, and compared to ours as well. So the types of reserves and the amounts, I think, is kind of what they're looking at and comparing it with best practice.
And as we went through the COVID period and a bunch of gyrations, we borrowed from different reserves, one to another. Is part of what's being looked at in that review consolidation of the reserves in some way, or are we required by law to keep them segregated, even if we can borrow one from another?
We are required by law to keep them all separate. Each of the enterprise is treated separately, but they are a consolidation of reserves within the fund, like operations and supply reserves, or the Calaveras reserves, or CIP reserves. Those are some things they're looking at, but we can't cross or commingle the reserves.
We can borrow, but we can't commingle.
Yes.
Okay. Well, if those are the rules. Lisa, did you have?
Yes, back to your question. So in that paragraph, the first number that you cited to the 0.7 million is referring to the total change for the year of 26. And then the numbers that come after that are the components of what makes up that 0.7 million total. So the components are the treatment costs that are going 1.7 million higher. And then we have lower collection operation costs and lower CIP costs. So those all net out to the total of 0.6.
Sort of, but the treatment costs are projected to be 1.7 million higher, and pardon me? I don't know, I'm looking at the overview. And the but it's offset by 1.9 million lower in collection operations, and that difference would be 200,000 rather than 700,000. So where's the other $500,000 come from?
The CIP amount of the 500,000.
Oh, I see it below. Okay, I got it.
Yes.
That's all
So,
FY26.
yeah.
Thank you.
We'll look for a way to make that more smooth next time in the explanation.
Great,
Thank you.
that helps. And then the last question on our treatment costs, we have had a discussion for a couple years about wanting to make sure that our partner allocations were being done really according to which partner is proportionally driving which expense or what portion of the expenses. And we did have an update, as I recall, and it was, if I'm remembering right, it was more reassuring than we were fearful of. So was that completed, or does that remain an open issue? I can't even remember.
So what we've seen so far is that compared to historically, we're going back to what was traditional. COVID was kind of a blip and kind of made things look weird. But no, what we've seen is that we're going back to where we were previously.
So that the current allocations look about right.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. That's it for me.
I'll stay on that point because I'd written it down in my own way, which is when can we charge more? So I know we're under contract and the allocations is, yeah, charge more to them. We're sort of running it, and as expenses vary, I'm sure there's something in the contract that says we can pass on proportionately to that. Right. And is there any expenses that are not included that we have to take the risk on our own?
To my understanding, there is nothing that is excluded that we take risk on other than liability, but that was built into the contracts when we first made the agreements. Other than that, I don't know of any cost that we're not covering that's not being paid for proportionally.
As I remember, it's a pretty long contract.
1968 was the first agreement that we had with Mountain View, Los Altos, and Palo Alto. However, we've had an agreement with Stanford since almost 1930.
Wow. So as our rates go up for anything, including the staff we have to put on there and so on, they're proportionally passed
Correct.
over there. Okay. On page 7 of the report, you talk about, this is a minor problem, I'm just interested, the section 115 pension trust expenses are going to be picked up in future forecasts. Where was that before? It's just a different allocation too.
Please.
I'm sorry, say that question one more time.
The pension transfer of the 115 pension trust expenses, it's only 300,000. It's going to come into future forecasts. I just wondered where it was before and why it's coming over now.
Is it in the treatment fund you're looking at or the collections? The treatment one. That's an accounting reconciliation of ensuring, frankly, that we are appropriately charging all the partners for their pro rata share of the 115 contributions. And so I think we have been making those contributions, but we have cleaned up how it's displayed and how it's allocated.
Okay. And then speaking of labor, at the very top, you talk about having added 3 new staff positions. I know that was not done in secret, but those are because of the new treatment plant and how we need to staff that. Is that
Partially, yes. The other is that the increased regulations that we've had through the state. So a combination of those items together.
Yeah. Okay.
And Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong, those are something that will be brought forward as part of the FY27 proposed budget.
Correct.
For this committee's consideration and ultimately council's recommendation.
Correct.
So the rates assume that add, but committee members, that will be one of the recommendations as part of the public works budget in May.
Correct.
And then over on packet page 15, staff report page 7, you have some discussions about accelerating the CIP program and on, let's see, this is on sewer replacement. We'd gone from 1 to 2.5 miles a year, and then there were some bumps in the road and so on. And so this is still sort of under consideration for how many miles a year we're going to do. What?
Yes.
What?
So in the
I'm sorry.
collection system, yes, we did come to the council a couple of years ago now with a plan to move to the
remember that.
5 miles per project or 2.5 miles a year of main replacement for the sewer utility. And that is still the plan. But as Eric mentioned, we did have to defer the first of those projects, and we're planning to resume the first project for construction in fiscal year 28.
Which is the 1 or the 2.5 miles?
It is going to be a project that is 5 miles total, but we're only going to do
Okay,
the
got it.
projects every other year to try to have larger projects that get the most cost-effective bids.
So that's exactly what you have in there that you're budgeting that's reflected in these forecasts?
Yes.
Okay. That's what I thought it was saying, but I just wondered if we were stopped yet again for any reason on doing that. So
It's reflected in, that is what's reflected in the forecast would be that first 5 miles in 2028.
yeah, okay. And then just, we know this, but it pops so strongly on page 13 where you do the project operations reserve level from now 7258, and by 3031, you're it's, if I understand this risk assessment, what's the difference between in 26 and 31, the 7258 and the 10533?
Are you looking at table 5?
Table 5, packet page 17, staff report page 13.
Okay, you're asking what is the risk assessment level compared with the reserve, the projected operations reserve level?
Yeah, what do we do with these numbers? Is
Yes.
the question.
Thanks for the question. That's a good question. So in our reserve management guideline policies, we outline, the guidelines for the reserve. So we're trying to get to the reserve to be within the guideline range. And then the risk assessment tries to look at a series of utility specific risks. Like if our CIP costs are 10% higher than we thought they were going to be, or our revenue drops by the most that it has dropped in the last 10 years, and those things happening together. So that's what the risk assessment line is, and it's separate, not added, or that's what the risk assessment value is, and it's just a separate calculation from the operations reserve guideline.
Okay. I think that's it for me. Yes. So this results in your original slide of about $10 more. The original slide. In terms of the
Right,
utility.
$10.70 for the residential customers.
Residential. I mean, the residents are also sensitive to the percentages, but they're more sensitive to the dollars. So anything else from council members? Okay.
I'll just add that in our communications, I think we want to continue to emphasize that we're in the midst of a generational investment in the wastewater treatment plant, or 2 generations probably, in addition to additional regulations that are on top of that. And in the absence of that, ratepayers are just going to assume costs just keep going up at this rate. So I think we need to explain that and the merits of it. I, for a long time, had wanted us to actually be charging to build reserves for this big expenditure, but we're doing closer to a pay-as-you-go, but with some borrowing and going forward. So anyway, I just want to emphasize the importance of that in the communication going forward. On that note, I will move the staff recommendations that the Finance Committee recommend that we adopt resolution of attachment A to the entire City Council.
I'll second. Calling the vote, or
Councilmember Lou,
Yes.
Chair Lowing,
yes.
Councilmember Burt,
Yes.
motion carries unanimously.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to item number 2. Shift chairs, shift staff.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to introduce Senior Resource Planner Adriana Artola. She's going to do a presentation about the water utility financial forecast and rate increase.
Before they start, just Chair, committee members want to thank Eric for his first presentation to Finance Committee, and this will be Adriana's as well. So thank you to both of them for taking this leap.
Yes, thank you. It doesn't hurt.
Right. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. As already mentioned, my name is Adriana Artola, Senior Resource Planner for Water. And I'll be presenting you with staff's recommendation for fiscal 2027. We're also joined by Commissioner Phillips, as you know, who will give some more insight into the UAC's recommendation. So moving on to the second slide. The fiscal 27 proposed rate increase is 10%, and that's consistent with prior forecasts. There are updates related to the underlying distribution and commodity rate increases. Specifically, the SFPUC wholesale rate assumption has increased, which I can explain more later. On the distribution side, the final forecast reflects lower capital and operating expenses than previously forecasted, which helps to offset the larger commodity rate increase and keep the overall rate increase at no more than 10%. When looking at that 5-year trajectory, this is an improvement compared to the preliminary forecast when looking at those outer years. Since the preliminary forecast, we've refined both the CIP and operating expense projections. The preliminary 5-year CIP budget contains some conservative assumptions and contingencies, which have since been refined. And on the operating side, the 5-year forecast also reflects refined budget assumptions and the citywide effort to reduce costs and find efficiencies, which I'll talk more about on the next slide. Here is where I will note that when staff presented its recommendation to the UAC did not approve staff's recommendation. They instead approved 5.2, a recommendation of an 8% rate increase for fiscal year 2027, which we can talk more about later in this discussion. Next slide. So leadership has taken a close look at where we can find efficiencies and reduce costs. You've already seen some of these items during the wastewater presentation, and now you're seeing some figures that are water specific. And I'll just mention, this is an ongoing process. So we've listed some additional potential reductions that we've identified, but have not yet included in the forecasts. Your next slide. You saw this comparison, or the Finance Committee saw this comparison during the preliminary forecast presentation. But as a reminder, as of fiscal year 2026, the city's average compared to peers that also receive 100% SFPUC supply. And when taking into consideration the estimated fiscal 27 bill with that 10% rate increase, the city is expected to remain kind of average compared to peers. Next slide. This slide is showing the rate drivers for fiscal 27. And as you can see, restoring reserves and water supply are the two largest categories here. The 10% rate increase supports overall reserve levels, and I'm going to speak to this more in later slides. The water supply cost reflects the SFPUC wholesale rate increase. Our most recent estimate is 7.4% for fiscal 27. The UAC had some concerns about the SFPUC wholesale rates, particularly the uncertainty of rate increases. Last year's fiscal 27 projection was a 1% rate increase. And so now the estimate is 7.4%. So that is an increase to what we were expecting last year. So we can, we can address questions, discuss this more later in the presentation. A small portion of the rate increase is expected to go towards capital expenses, and then an even smaller share for operating expenses. And that reflects the budgetary reductions mentioned in the previous slide, as well as a reduction in debt service costs from those Series 2011 revenue bonds reaching full maturity. And then last thing I'll note is underlying these annual rate increases are the revenue impacts from the recent drought, long-term decline in water consumption, as well as lower rate increases in prior years. And so that's still an underlying factor. Next slide. So this reflects operating and capital expenses in the bar chart. The green line are revenue projections, historical and projected revenues. The operating expense projections reflect inflationary assumptions. The water supply costs have been updated based on SFPUC's most recent long-term financial plan. And as you can see, capital spending is projected to ramp up in fiscal 28 when WMR and seismic improvement projects are scheduled to take place. Next slide. This slide shows the operations reserve projections. And as you can see, we're projecting to remain within the guideline range. This is where I'll explain staff's recommendation of approving a transfer of up to $5.5 million from the operations reserve to the CIP reserve. As you can see in fiscal year 2025, that uptick in the operations reserve, that was due to operating expenses coming in lower than budgeted that year. So there's this increase to the operations reserve. And so staff is recommending a transfer of some of these funds to the CIP reserve to help restore that balance and to fund CIP projects in later years. Next slide. As you can see, we're now projecting reserves gradually growing over the 5-year period for the CIP reserve. And I'll talk more about overall reserves in the next slide. We can keep going. Yes. So this slide shows historical and projected total reserve levels. And we've included this slide because it is a little bit more helpful when thinking big picture about the water utilities total reserve position, regardless of when reserve transfers may be happening. Next slide. So this slide is to put into perspective the water fund's current reserve position relative to peers and what it means for bond ratings on outstanding or potential new water revenue bonds. So to do this, we're looking at cash, our total unrestricted cash and days cash on hand. Days cash on hand is a metric that compares cash to operating expenses. So looking at cash and days cash on hand is an easier way to make peer comparisons. And they're also the financial metrics used by rating agencies. The water fund's total unrestricted cash position is similar to its total reserve position, which is reported on a full accrual basis. So there's that accounting difference there if you're wondering how they compare. So the chart on the left compares Palo Alto to some of its neighboring peers, and the orange line is median days cash on hand of all public water and wastewater utilities rated by S&P Global Ratings. As you can see, water utilities tend to carry very high days cash on hand balances. This is particularly true for California water utilities, given the elevated exposure to risks. Looking at the bar on the right, this is showing the water fund's historical cash and days cash on hand, as well as projected. And so you can see where cash declined during the past 5 years as the water fund drew on its reserve balances during the pandemic and the most recent drought. And then you can see the projections we're projecting to kind of slowly restore balances over the 5-year forecast. And so the reason we are discussing this and presenting this to the Finance Committee is, days cash on hand is important to consider not only for restoring budgetary flexibility, mitigating risks, but it's also important for maintaining high credit ratings. It is a factor for maintaining a high credit rating. The city may consider issuing new debt to fund capital projects such as seismic improvement projects. So how the water fund is viewed by rating agencies does matter, and again, it's really, I think that the key importance is budgetary flexibility and mitigating risk for the water fund. Next slide. We've included a slide on highlighting tools and resources to help customers kind of control their bills. I've just included this for reference. We can keep going. Next slide. This is the communication strategy for reference. We can move to the next slide. So this brings us to staff's recommendation that the Finance Committee recommend that City Council adopts a resolution approving up to $5.5 million transfer from the Operations Reserve to the CIP Reserve in fiscal 26, approves the fiscal 27 water utility financial forecast, and amends the rate schedules effective July 1st, 2026. And that concludes the presentation.
Can you go back to slide 10? So on the on the left-hand side, you're obviously showing days cash on hand, and we're low. What does that mean today if we were going to do bond financing? Meaning, are we already in trouble, or we're still good, and Menlo Park should be spending more money? I mean, what? Interpret these numbers for us, or maybe Warren wants to help too.
It's hard for me to speculate what the rating agencies will do with this information. It's one of probably 5 primary factors that are weighted, and S&P and Moody's do weight them differently. So I don't want to really speculate what they'll do and how this may change.
What you said is already helpful to know. There's
Yes.
like 5 main ones, not 25 or not one. That's
They
helpful.
have like 5 primary ones, and they're weighted differently. Reserves and cash on hand is certainly something that they look at.
And then on the right-hand side, this is a projection of days of what we think we're going to get in terms of days outstanding, cash on hand. The right-hand side is days outstanding. Is that what the scale is?
The bars are total unrestricted cash, and then the orange line is days cash on hand. And so, yes, to the right of that line,
It's just the scale of what the days outstanding is.
yeah, it's so you can see, it's although total unrestricted cash, let's say maybe kind of setting out or growing, it is relative to the days cash on hand is relative to operating expenses, right? So operating expenses are growing over this period, so that ratio will change based on that.
Okay. Anybody else, either other council members have any questions about that slide? Okay. Go ahead. Who has to jump in? Pat, you want to? Okay, sure. Sorry.
Yeah, I would like to comment that this recommendation was rejected.
Yeah.
By the UAC, 5-2 vote. It was quite a bit of discussion on this. What was approved by a 5-2 vote was actually an 8% increase, and half, if you go to slide 5, half of the moving half to operating reserves, which from what's there. So instead of 2.37 million, it would be about 1.2 million. And you note that the two biggest portions or two biggest components of the increase are almost equal, actually equal in magnitude, are the restoring reserves and the water supply. As background, there's tremendous frustration with the SFPUC and the fact that we were told it'd be about a 1% increase in November, and then we're hit with a 7.4% increase to deal with. There's frustration also that they have somewhat rudely rebuffed Councilmember Stone's attempt to communicate. There's also frustration with Bosca perhaps not taking as firm a stand. So the two commissioners who I polled to get in writing there why they opposed the recommendation, none of it had to do with the size of the increase or any opposition to an 8% increase rather than a 10%, but rather to a real desire not to quote rubber stamp, which is a term one of them used, these kind of actions on the part of Bosca, and also a need to look deeply into our reserve policy. The rationale for kind of reducing the reserve was that if you look again at slide number 7, which was the one we were looking at before, making that you have an 8% increase, you would actually take the planned 2027 projected operations reserves to the same level they would be in 2028, that they're projected to be in 2028. So the thought is, let's push this increase down the road. There's a lot of discomfort with this level of continuing double-digit increases. I would say, in addition to believing we should, or the subcommittee approving a lower immediate increase with a potential understanding that may be a larger increase further on. There's a belief that we perhaps are over reserving, given that we are paying off our last debt here. On the chart you saw with Santa Clara, one of the reasons they have much lower debt than we do, or one of the reasons they can sustain that, is apparently, I understand, Commissioner Cotori, please contradict me if I'm wrong, that they have no debt. So, you know, the need for have to hold reserves in order to keep your bond ratings high is not there. Kind of on the secondary side, going back to something that Councilmember Burt said about the in the previous one, I think there's whatever we do, there's an enormous need to have good communication here. Part of what's happening, which was called out explicitly at the commission's suggestion, is the fact that 2% of the increase is due to the fact that we're just using less water. And, you know, that's counterintuitive to a lot of residents. But, you know, the more with electricity, gas, and water, the more that we can serve, the higher the rates are going to be. It's just a law of economics, or at least a law of the way the rates are done. So same concern here that you maybe had. We're not gold plating anything. We're not, you know, giving enormous raises, much as everyone may deserve it. In the utility department, is just water prices going up, necessary reserve transfers, and then the fact that the consumption has been going down. Thanks, unless there's any questions.
That was an excellent summary. I sat there and I heard what they said, and that's an excellent summary. Yeah, the frustrating thing is that the residents' reward for conserving is that we charge them more. So, you know, we could say, go ahead and we got plenty of water, go ahead and spend whatever you want and the rates will go down, but of course their bills are still going to go up. But it's very frustrating. And then the unreliability of those estimates from SFPUC has got everybody very charged up. Which means that, you know, staff is now doing your best efforts to put a reasonable estimate in there, but we still don't know if that's really the final cost is going to be, because that's just in their range estimate, right? No questions for Bob? Okay. Comments? Pat? Sure.
So first, starting with that issue of how reduced consumption contributes to higher rates. It's not the only factor. Explaining that to ratepayers, I think there is actually a pretty simple message, and we just need to keep repeating it, which is that costs us essentially the same amount of infrastructure for a higher volume of water and a lower volume of water. And so that expense gets spread over fewer or more gallons. And that when the rate goes up because we've reduced consumption, it doesn't correspond to your bill going up that much, because you're using fewer gallons at a higher rate per gallon. And those basic points, I think ratepayers can all understand if we just keep mapping that out to them real clearly. They may not be happy with it, but they won't say, this is preposterous that my rates are going up because I conserve, and they will imply that their bill is going up when it's their rate that's going up. So I think that's real important that we continue to emphasize it. And then a couple questions on the slide 3 that spoke about cost reductions. One was on staffing savings of $260,000 from vacant meter reading positions. Are we able to keep them vacant because of the AMIs?
That's correct. So we have probably 95% now deployed. So we do have, like, I think 2 more regular meter readers and a couple hourly meter readers.
Okay, so there, for both the council and the public, I think we really want to emphasize that our labor costs are going down because we've invested in these technologies.
Right.
We get other benefits, and you can talk about those at the same time. But at a minimum, we're seeing efficiency as a result of investing in the technologies.
Yes, so we are gonna remove 4 vacant positions this year, and we plan on removing another 1 full-time and 3 hourly positions next year.
Well, that's great. We just need to make sure that policymakers and ratepayers understand that as much as the rates are going up, we're working on things to mitigate them, and this is a success story.
Yeah, I also want to add plug for AMI. We are getting like real outage data, so faster restoration, water leak detections. Customers love those notices.
Yeah,
So they'll get
the
those.
leak detection I've heard is just really valuable.
And
So maybe this is already in the works, but I really look forward to us pushing this information out repeatedly to the public on what are the benefits they're getting from this, and they're already seeing them. And then there was a reference to leveraging interdepartment resources. Is there
yeah, so
kind of a description of what's possible?
Yeah, so we're leveraging a quarter of the clerk's office to help facilitate the UAC meetings instead of hiring another position that was recently vacant. We're also leveraging more at the city attorney's time because of all the different utilities and all the regulations we have upcoming and all the new programs. We're also using more of IT, Darren's time with fiber to the premises, and also using more of, I think, HR as well with all the vacancies. So we're trying to add more staffing on our end to help with some of our needs and also help reduce some of the general funds.
So can you explain to me how that's really a net reduction in cost? If instead of utility staff manning a utilities meeting, you've got a quarter time on the clerk's office, but that's remains an expense. Is the clerk then billing utilities?
Yes, so we bill a quarter of her time or their time to the utilities department. And in lieu of that, we don't fill that vacant position that we have that used to help.
But in theory, if you had to staff it yourselves, you'd have an internal expense versus an expense that you're being billed. So how is that actually a reduction in cost?
So instead of paying for a full-time coordinator or an administrative assistant, we're paying only a quarter time of a full.
Yeah, but you're not getting that much greater efficiency as a result of the clerk spending a quarter person per year on it. That doesn't create efficiency. It sounds like there may be, for that other 3/4 of the person, other ways that you are, in fact, reducing the need for that admin. Not just that you're billing the clerk's office, which sounds to me like it's roughly an offset in expense, but by being able to do that quarter person offset, you don't have to fill a position that you've trimmed expenses for the other 3/4 of that person's duties.
I think, yeah, for the other person, probably be more of a halftime to learn to be as technical as what the clerk's helping us do with the scheduling the NCPA meetings, also with the UAC. So it's more of a halftime body we're saving there.
Okay, you think because they already know what they're doing, they're more efficient at what they're doing. Christine, nod your head yes. Okay, that makes sense. And then, but it does sound like you're reducing staffing elsewhere in admin, and you should just simply, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a good thing. But explain that. And then lastly, on the SFPUC issues, I appreciate the concerns that the UAC and others have had in both their policies, their practices, and their transparency. Have we gotten any responses to our concerns?
So I think that Bosca has followed up with some questions to SFPUC. So we have found that, in terms of getting responses to the questions that can be the most effective, or that can be a very a path that we can use. So I'm not really prepared to answer like if there's exact questions. There may be some outstanding questions to SFPUC, but at this point in time, we're not waiting for anything as it relates to the rate increase. They've had several meetings with us to explain the reasons for the rate increase and provide the documentation of that in accordance with the contract. So I'm not exactly sure if that answers your question, but we're not waiting on any information right now for this.
It does in part. My understanding is over the years, previously we had very little support from other BOSCA members for questioning these things. And are we seeing greater support among some of the other BOSCA members?
Can I just jump in on that one? I've had a couple long discussions with our representative, Bosca, Councilmember Stone, and he feels like he's finally getting some minimal help, particularly from Menlo Park. And he's willing to double down and have the mayor there double down and kind of keep pushing that forward. But it's been, I mean, to summarize the conversation on that, it's been sort of apathetic other than Palo Alto and Menlo Park. So we have to do the troops there, and we may need to go to other elected officials, which he's already done. He's already talked to Senator Becker about it once, and that probably needs to be pushed as well, because we're fighting a monopoly. So we have to have other angles.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to add a couple more things on what you said, Pat. Obviously part of this is maintenance, but I don't think folks understand how much maintenance we have to do. So I love that sentence that was on packet page 50. The system consists of 231 miles of mains. That in and of itself tells you that, you know, that they don't last forever. And 3,000 fire hydrants and 23,000 metered connections. And, you know, that's the kind of detail I think we need to have in front of our residents. So they really understand, again, as I said at the outset of this meeting, you know, the truth about what we're trying to manage here. Nothing fuzzy or blown out of proportion. One other cost savings is this implementation of a credit card processing fee, and my understanding is that came straight from the UAC. So they earned their money last year. All of it. That's right. Saving $200K, which I think is just terrific. So I may have some other things, but would you like to go ahead, George?
Sure. I have a handful of things. I'll jump around a little bit and maybe be able to pull it together. A question about the reserves and thinking about the UAC recommendation. Do we invest our reserves or get any sort of, or what kind of yields do we actually get?
Our reserves are in our pooled cash, and our pooled cash are managed by Chandler Asset Management.
Okay.
The assets are managed under our investment policy.
Okay.
So,
Okay. So it's not a separate, like, short-term, lower yield, higher liquidity sort of investment portfolio. It's just with our standard pooled investments. And so if we stash some money in reserves now, we're not necessarily having some opportunity cost or letting that money sit idle.
no, we
Okay.
have a robust investment policy that has the short-term portfolio with higher liquidity and some longer term. So it's actively managed.
Okay.
But it is conservative.
Yeah.
As
Right.
it should be.
Correct.
And it is liquid as it should be.
Correct.
Right.
The answer to that part of your question. We're not doing speculative international stocks. Right?
Yes. Yes.
Correct. Absolutely.
Question about water usage. Do we project any changes in demand as we plan for more housing or just plan for different kinds of development in general?
Yes, let's see. I have a backup slide that shows the water projections, the demand projections used for the financial forecast.
Okay.
Let's see. Give me 1 second, I'm having trouble. Here we go. Slide 38. Yeah, so this slide reflects historical water demand and projected water demand. And as you can see, that blue line, that's our current fiscal 27 projection. It's on a declining trend. This assumes a long-term decline in demand consistent with a historical trend. It does not assume increases in demand from upcoming housing developments, let's say, because the timing is uncertain. There may be housing developments in the pipeline, but depending on when the projects are complete, when those buildings are inhabited, the timing is very uncertain. So we apply conservative assumptions to our financial planning. And so therefore, those projects are not included in the sales, the water demand forecast specifically, the sales.
it.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And it's, I agree that that's highly difficult and risky to plan for. Any number of entitled projects may not actually be built or may not be inhabited on any particular timeline. But it's a tailwind that the way we are not planning for it means that as we see demand hopefully increase as we build more housing, we can be somewhat less aggressive increasing rates. So yeah, that's interesting, and I suppose something that we'll just adjust for year by year. On messaging, what's the best story we can tell about these rate increases, meaning that water supply will be safer during earthquakes, safer during fires, that we're updating hydrants and other sort of, or maybe even improving water quality by replacing our pipes and mains. I think that's one aspect of the messaging that wasn't really considered. I realize some of that. We don't necessarily want to exaggerate that story. Some of that story, it's going to be hard to quantify, or it's going to be hard to really precisely nail down. But all of these investments are in service of those goals, and there should be something we can say about that. So, like, how would we potentially articulate that in the messaging?
Hello, Catherine Elvert, Utilities Communications Manager. Thank you for that question. Actually, the communication about the value of our investment in rates and our infrastructure is one of the key messages in our communication strategy. We want to communicate that through these rates, we are funding safe and reliable utility services, including for our water mains and pipes replacement, including for water quality testing. We do see that there are increasing regulations for water quality standards, for example, and we want to make sure that we are ensuring safe and quality water delivery to all of our customers. So that is cornerstone to our messaging. I'm glad that you highlighted that because it's a good reminder for us. And also, as Councilmember Burt said, we want to make sure that our customers understand the value of the investment in these rates.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I totally understand that that's a message we'll always hit on. I think it wasn't really clearly surfaced, at least in this part of the slide. But yeah, I'm sure we'll get that message out to our customers. On balance, on the UAC's recommendation, I am comfortable with the idea that we are more conservative with our reserves, and we approve the 8% increase. The main hesitation is just that we have a reserve study in flight. We don't necessarily want to revisit all of our reserves. Like, I withheld some comments on the wastewater reserve, but in this case, I think it is reasonable for all the reasons that Robert mentioned. So, yeah.
I have a question over on the debt service, and this is something that we can talk about more in the bigger picture as we go along as well. But it seems like we have debt capacity, and may look at ways to use that. And you could think about if we did that, by May, what would you prioritize for looking at there? And that nothing has to be done on that now, but I think particularly you got the one small loan that's finished up, and the other one is not that big either. So it seems like there's some capacity there. And then on back to the core question of rates, again, we think I had it open and then I dropped it. Over on packet, page 62, where you point out as of January 26th, the rates right now. Is the 25 column there, is that, I wasn't quite sure what that was at the bottom. Is that the annual rate?
I'm sorry, did you say page 22?
Staff report 25, packet page 62.
And you're looking at the bottom row for
Yeah.
that table?
The 348.
That's so these are different, the rows have different usage levels. And so that bottom row is a usage level of 2,500 cubic feet per
Okay.
month.
Okay.
And so that would be the bill that a resident who used that much water would pay.
Yeah, I didn't quite know what those 4 and 7 and 9 were there, so I'm glad I asked that question. But we do have the highest in dollars in general of the surrounding communities. At least that's how I'm reading this table. And then I thought it was notable that if you compare to peers who receive 100% potable water, then our bill is slightly below average. Our communications manager is going to have a hard time communicating that one. That's just a little bit down in the weeds. Well, what's potable water and why don't we get some and they get some? So again, it's sort of, we're the highest in dollars. So I think we should do everything we can to address that. And in the short term here, or as a first step, I should say, I think that the UAC has made a reasonable recommendation. It's not very costly. It's not very risky. It gets the doggone percentage under that 2 digits. And I definitely think it's worth saying that we listen to UAC and we listen to residents, and I don't see this as a big risk, so I'd be okay with that. Pat?
Yeah, just to follow up first, I want to make sure everybody knows that graph is as of January 2026. And once again, it's a question of how much would our rates go up compared to others. The other issue related to the UAC recommendation is what George brought up, which is whether we have any projections for the housing growth. And we're in the midst of our largest housing growth in decades. We don't know whether all of our RENA allocation will be built and online in these coming 6 years now of the housing cycle, but we know a lot will. And so I'm fine with making conservative projections, but no projection is not conservative. It's just outside of the reality of what we're going to have in new housing. So I would like to recommend that as we move to the motion and if we adopt the UAC proposal, that we incorporate a conservative increase in usage based upon the housing increases, and that we do so conservatively. And we hopefully will see greater benefit on spreading the consumption or greater consumption spread over the same infrastructure than we build into the projections.
I agree with. Oh, sorry if you weren't done.
No, I didn't know if Lisa was chomping at the bit to respond.
I would like to say that we do have those forecasts, and you'll see the RENA forecast. We're coordinating closely with planning to develop those forecasts for the purposes of our supply planning. And so we can certainly bring up that information and look at it in comparison to these numbers and come back with something. And then the only other fact that I wanted to offer to add to what Adriana mentioned earlier is that as part of our budget, we do have some revenue estimates for new growth, and we did include those also in a kind of conservative way where we spread those over several years, so we can look at that estimate as well as we refine the forecast.
Well, I thought I had heard that they weren't included at all in the numbers on that
Yeah.
slide.
And so I think it's just a kind of a refinement that I'm mentioning that now, so you're aware that we are incorporating some revenue estimates as part of this financial forecast. But the way that we came up with our demand forecast, which I think is what we were kind of literally responding to that question, we came up with a demand forecast in not using the population type of method, looking at RENA numbers projected.
So it seems that our demand or revenue forecasts should track and use the same or very similar assumptions. But does that mean that, I want to make sure I'm understanding that if we did have the demand forecast track with revenue forecasts, would it show lower expenses in those outlying years than what we have in the projection?
I think that's something that I'm going to need to coordinate back with budget about, to just make sure that what the population assumed in those projected developments that we're seeing in the revenue side of the budget, whether those are precisely in corresponding with RENA numbers. So I'll have to look into that.
And if we're on the cusp of potentially adopting or recommending to the council the UAC recommendation, does staff have any further comments about concerns that they might have with that recommendation?
I don't think there's any concerns. I think that what I also heard from the UAC discussion was a desire to have a lower increase now with the potential for a higher increase later. And so I think that would be the potential consequence, I guess, or pro and con to weigh, is a larger increase in the future needed.
Or that higher increase later being somewhat mitigated by the additional consumption.
Exactly. I think that was the Utilities Commission said we don't know if we're going to need the higher increase later. Let's not take it now.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, when I was going to say, I agree with that. And I had made a note when you were talking, George, that you should talk to John Late and get a realistic proposal, because you don't probably need it for the next 2 years. We're not going to have thousands of new residents the next 2 years, but starting in 2 years is about when I think you would want to do it. But I'm speaking just not as much of an insider on that as John would be in that department. Because I think that creates accuracy, as Pat is saying, in what we're projecting, because we know it's not zero in terms of what we're going to do. I think we also know it's probably not going to be 6,086, because we probably aren't going to get quite there by the end of this cycle, but we'll get there.
Chair Lowing, before we go to a motion, would you like to hear public comment?
Sure.
Okay. We currently have one request to speak, and our first speaker is Peter D. Peter, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. This is Peter Dreckmeyer. I'm the policy director for Yosemite Rivers Alliance, formerly Tuolumne River Trust. Very good discussion. I appreciate the smart people we have working on our behalf here in Palo Alto. The SFPUC's financial crisis, which we share our burden in, is grounded in decades of deferred system maintenance. And in fact, Palo Alto led a lawsuit in 1979 because the SFPUC was charging wholesale customers more for water than San Francisco residents, and they were using the revenues for San Francisco services and not for system maintenance. But it takes a while for things to actually happen. And it wasn't until 2008 that the SFPUC embarked on the Water System Improvement Program, which is 80 plus capital projects to make sure the system could withstand a major earthquake. And since 2008, the price of so the price tag for that was $4.8 billion plus debt service, which essentially doubled the cost. And since 2008, rates have increased fourfold to pay off that debt. And that sent a really strong price signal to customers to use water more efficiently. And so the water demand has been decreasing constantly. We can't change the past. The SFPUC made a lot of mistakes, but we can avoid the next big problem. And it happens that the same policies that the SFPUC uses to justify their opposition to the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan, which Palo Alto supports, also harm ratepayers. Their design drought is 72% more severe and 19 times less likely to occur than what Valley Water or East Bay Mud are planning for. And you add to that inflated demand projections, and the situation we're in right now is a great example. They overprojected sales last year, and we're paying the price. They've manufactured this gloom and doom scenario that encourages unnecessary investments in expensive alternative water supplies. Palo Alto recently spent more than $500,000 on a One Water plan that was rejected last year by the UAC as being unnecessary. And meanwhile, the SFPUC has produced an alternative water supply plan that suggests we might need to invest $17 to $25 billion in alternative water supplies. This is 100% an avoidable cost. Would like to share information with that on you. So council needs to hold a study session on water, get the SFPUC and BOSCA there to understand the issues and put us on a more sustainable financial track. And I would like to have a lot of information to share. We cannot count on the SFPUC or BOSTA to get us out of this mess they've created.
Thank you. Your time is up.
Thank you.
That concludes public comment on item 2.
Okay, any more council member comments on that? If not, let's go to a vote.
Do we have a motion?
Sorry,
Yeah.
let's go to a motion.
I can maybe say that I move the staff recommendations with the exception of recommending the UAC recommended water rate increases
Of 8%.
8%. Does that capture the differences? Yep. Okay, thank you. Needs a second?
Yeah, I'll second. Yeah, if we need any more, let us know. So you give us the green light to go ahead.
8%. Yes.
The motion that actually the recommendation from the UAC also included that it was reduced by reducing the amount to the operation reserves by 1.2 million, as is shown on the screen here. So I don't know if that needs, or you would like that to be part of the motion.
I did copy this from UAC, so if there are other changes, please let me know.
Okay.
What about staff's perspective on that? UAC provided a methodology to do that.
So it was my intention for that to be included in the motion as Christine has up there. And if staff has concerns with that, we really want to hear it too.
Yeah, exactly.
Commissioner, are you saying that item 2 doesn't reflect what you think the UAC adopted?
I believe item 2 does, but the verbal resolution I heard did not include the 1.2 million. So no, I think this absolutely
Written
reflects.
motion does capture their full recommendation.
Right.
I just thought you should look at that and maybe you're going to say, oh, I have a better idea or not. So
I might suggest you just put the word approximately, reserves by approximately 1.2 million, because ultimately we're talking about percentages and numbers, and that would give staff the flexibility to get it right later.
that's okay, right? Same with me.
Thank you.
Anything else? Then we will go to a vote.
Councilmember Lowing,
Yes.
Councilmember Burt,
Yes.
Councilmember Lou,
Yes.
motion carries unanimously.
Very good staff work. Whoa, something just happened. You gonna stay for the third one, Commissioner? Bob, you gonna stay? Okay. Okay. Yeah, before when I was looking over here, I wasn't looking. Okay, our third item for today is on the residential refuse collection and utility rate schedule. And we have presentation.
Hi, I'm Karen North. I'm the Assistant Director of Public Works, and I'm here with Paula Borges Fujimoto. She will be doing the presentation. Good afternoon. We have a short presentation for you. Closer to the microphone. Sir. Okay, logistics. All right, good afternoon. We have a short presentation for you on the refuse rate change for fiscal year 27. To provide some reminders, the refuse rates are based on the customer container size and service frequency and provide a comprehensive suite of essential services, which are too many for me to verbally list today, but they are included in the staff report. Residential rates were last updated in fiscal year 2018, and commercial rates were updated in FY 2017. And the rates are designed to recover the city's costs for collecting, transporting, processing, and disposing of the various solid waste materials that are generated in the city. They also are designed to cover for costs related to compliance with state and regulatory requirements, as well as extensive waste diversion services and programs. This table shows the various residential garbage container sizes available and the corresponding monthly rates and proposed rates. The smallest container available to residents is a 20-gallon container. And with the 3% rate increase, they would be looking at less than $1 increase per month. This category of customers are approximately 49% of our subscription for residents. The 32-gallon container is approximately a 41% prescription rate, and they would be looking at a $1.50 increase per month. Next. This slide is is information that is on table 2 of the staff report, just portrayed in a graph instead of a table. And it provides a comparison of fiscal year 26 monthly refuse rates for residents in the regional jurisdictions. To kind of set the scene, the orange bars are the Palo Alto current and Palo Alto proposed rates. The green bars are the other jurisdictions, and the blue line is the average rate. So looking at the left graph, for the mini can, the 20-gallon can container, which is the smallest container available for residents. Palo Alto's rate is currently $27.81. The proposed rate would be $28.64, and that is approximately 36% less than what the average is for the other jurisdictions. And then the same thing could be carried forward on the 32-gallon and the comparisons. Next slide. So the recommended 3% rate increase would generate approximately $1 million in revenues, and it would better reconcile revenues with the projected costs of providing refuse services, as well as minimizing the reliance on the reserves. Next slide. So this concludes your short presentation, and we are available for questions.
Any public comment on this one?
We do not have any requests to speak.
Okay, council members, George?
I have a couple. So thank you. 3% is a great number to see, and I understand that we'll probably need to increase our rates somewhat faster in the future. Though for this meeting, I think 3% is fine. A couple questions. So how are we able to charge less than our neighbors, given that green waste is 70%, 76% of our cost and presumably not giving us a deal? Like what? Yeah, how are we able to keep these costs relatively low compared to our neighbors?
So we've had a contract with Green Waste of Palo Alto since 2009, and we've amended and extended the contract 3 times and incorporated cost reductions as well as new services to help the city meet its zero waste goals and greenhouse gas reductions associated with solid waste.
So we have a lot of contract power and are able to negotiate prices flat or down over time, whereas in other utilities we may not.
Our contract power comes into play when we are amending the contract and looking at existing services and existing services. After that amendment is approved by council, the contract costs usually have an annual increase that is based on 4 different indexes that are in the contract. So after the contract is approved, we don't have as much power to reduce costs.
Right.
But because it's a long-term contract, we've been able to be efficient with our costs related to the contract.
Okay. One thing that I suspected was that maybe our residential rates are lower, but because we have so much commercial and maybe our commercial rates are similar or higher than neighboring cities, that might explain why we might have lower residential costs, even though, you know, we're in the same marketplace bidding for the same vendors, finding the same tax as our neighbors. Is that actually part of the story at all, or is that just speculation?
Prop 218 requires that rates be based on the sector. So we cannot be charging the residential customers for more than what the costs for the services are. So we
Okay. Understand that. One thing that I was curious about was on packet page 93, where sort of talking about the costs for future years. It said that the balance will decrease in part due to extra street sweeping in areas with parked oversized vehicles. And I would have thought that street sweeping as part of routine maintenance or even as part of sort of a dedicated oversized vehicle program would be more in the transportation or sort of general public works bucket, but it is not. It is Is all street sweeping considered part of this refuse collection
It
utility?
is. Many other cities pay for street sweeping out of, like, say, stormwater or general fund or another type of fund. For Palo Alto, refuse fund covers street sweeping costs.
Okay. Okay, that's an interesting dynamic. Where where refuse collection encompasses some of our, like, at least one small part of our OSV. Yeah, thank you. Those are my questions.
Matt?
Thanks. Well, just on touching on that street sweeping, I mean, we're collecting, it's refuse that then we have to dispose of. So I think that's, whether other cities do it that way or not, I think it's appropriate. On the issue of commercial rates, are they also going up by 3%? And do we have a slide that compares us to other cities on commercial?
No, we do not have a slide on the
Do you have to
commercial.
know approximately how we compare?
Not offhand, but we do have that information. We just didn't prepare a slide for it.
Okay, yeah, I think that's relevant. And then one other thing is not only are our residential rates low, but we pay a premium for domestic recycling of certain materials that we chose to do because of the black hole on what happens on overseas recycling, and we're exceptional in that regard, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And do we have any updates on how that program is going? How much more is it costing us, and what do we know about how the materials are being dealt with?
Great question.
So City Council provided us a range, or actually a limit, of how much would be paid, and it would be up to $2 million additional costs. And so we haven't gotten to the $2 million yet per fiscal year. And I can say that the materials are being kept domestically, so mixed paper, mixed rigid plastics are being kept domestically. The main material that is going to overseas processing is cardboard, but we've been working with Green Waste to look at the resources available domestically, and if there are opportunities, we've been giving them the green light to keep the equivalent of Palo Alto's cardboard to be processed domestically.
So within that 2 million budget, we had originally focused, I think, on plastics, was it? But are you saying that as other domestic recycling opportunities emerge, you have authority to utilize that budget for whatever recycling we would move toward domestic if there are cost-effective and qualitatively advantageous sources?
Correct. And it's primarily with cardboard.
Okay. I think that's a real success story that we have going on there, and we should really make sure that that gets out there. So it's like our electricity supply. We're greener and cheaper, and that's the same here. So I'd really encourage us to do that. And then the last part of the story is similar to what we were talking about earlier on water. We get charged for the trash waste, and we don't get charged for our much bigger recyclable bins and our compost recyclable bins. I mean, I've got a 20-gallon trash can and a 64-gallon recyclable and a 96-gallon compost. And the big ones, I don't get charged at all.
Well, your garbage rate is a bundled rate that includes the services for
I understand that.
all of that.
But when we look at when ratepayers, when I've heard this over the many years, when we have an increase, particularly an increase that's greater than this, they're saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm getting charged this much for my little 20-gallon." Yeah, but you're getting for free the big ones, and that is a really important part of our messaging to once again reiterate to people that says your recycling costs are being absorbed within that black bin. And it may be obvious to most of us, but I can tell you there's a lot of the community that goes right over their head. And when we have an increase on the black bin costs, they say, oh my gosh, this is terrible. And very little appreciation that all those massive amounts of recyclables are for free. And of course, it in a way creates incentives for us to shrink our black bin individually. Now, if we do that, it actually collectively has an impact on our costs going up per gallon of black bin.
Mhm.
But individually, we can drive down our household refuge costs. So I think it's a valuable, positive story that we should just keep reiterating and not assume that everybody gets it.
And I guess I'd just like to comment that my personal narrative is that there's no services that are free. So, there is a cost associated with recycling and with compost, right? But it's in that bundled side
Yeah,
of
but
the container.
Getting that much of materials dealt with predominantly through recycling at this rate may not be free, but it's cheap, and we're green by comparison. And so I think that's the real message we want to get across. Thank you.
Do we ultimately know where that overseas cardboard goes, what it's used for?
Not ultimately, and staff has investigated, talked to other communities. We held workshops with other cities from Santa Clara County and Alameda County, and we hired a consultant to do our investigative analysis and actually place a tracker on material from San Jose's material recovery facility for green waste through LA and to overseas, not just one, but multiple trackers. And ultimately, all the sources are consistent with, we can track the material to the ports before they go overseas, but not once it goes beyond the ports.
So the air tag stays in there until it gets destroyed?
Some, not, some get lost, some are compacted through the various machinery and processing that it goes through.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other comments, oh, sorry, George.
Yeah, sorry, I missed a couple of notes here. How much is the underlying green waste contract increasing year over year? Is that the main driver of the 3%?
It is a big component of that 3%. So the main contract with Green Waste of Palo Alto, the expense is about 76% of our overall expenses.
So do they have like a 3% escalator every year, or and we're just passing that on?
Their escalator tends to be around the 3% or cost of living increase, but we are using the 3 different indexes to look at their base expenses as well as other expenses and connecting that increase.
Yep. And so we are also have the advantage for the refuse fund, relatively large reserves, seemingly compared to the previous utilities that we just discussed. So what's the history there? Like, our rate stabilization reserves have been very big. That's helped insulate some costs. By 2026, there's this in table 3 on page 94, there's this other change to reserves where we're pulling 2.7 million out of that relatively hefty reserve. So can you just talk through some of the reserve history and what that's meant for the utility and what the 2.7 million is?
I'll address the 2.7 million costs first. That is directly related to an increase in costs for green waste of Palo Alto contract. So we brought this to Finance Committee in November, as well as full council in December. And we were We amended the Green Waste of Palo Alto contract. It was going to end in June of 26. We amended it and extended it by 4 years. And because of some of the vehicles were older, we needed to allow the purchase of additional collection vehicles. And so that resulted in an additional $2.7 million in fiscal year 26.
Okay, so that's almost like a capital cost where we
Capital
purchase the vehicles, and so it's not listed under expenses. Okay. Okay, and how did our reserves get relatively high historically here?
Let's see. I'm not sure how to best answer the question.
Yeah, sorry, it's a wrong question.
Well, we plan for it, anticipating. Then we also, we delayed purchase due to COVID. We also delayed purchasing vehicles. So that's also how our reserves continue to increase. We also didn't do a rate increase. So we delayed, part of it was delaying the purchasing of vehicles, which would have dropped down our reserves. This is the first time we've done a rate increase for the refuse fund, partly because we've been really conservative. But we anticipate in the next 4 years, when we do go out for a new contract, we're anticipating that probably our rates are going to go up. So we're trying to hedge for that.
Yeah.
So we've just been very mindful of how we're spending our money.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I suppose the staff report mentioned that maybe next year or something we'll have a more detailed financial statement similar to the other utilities that like breaks down the allocated charges and customer service charges and efficiencies and all that, right? So this is simpler just because it's the first time in a little bit that we've increased the rates, but
Correct.
Next year it'll be more detailed.
Correct. And it's just a CPI just to keep us up so we don't have the pain of not doing anything, which we've had from other years where we've done no rate increases in other funds.
Great. Okay.
Okay, so can we get a motion on this third item?
Yeah, I will move the staff recommendation, which is our recommendation to the city council.
Second.
Okay,
Councilmember Lowing,
yes.
Councilmember Liu,
Yes.
Councilmember Burt,
Yes.
motion carries unanimously.
Okay, thank you. Very efficient, got a lot done. Are we done for the year? No, we want more fun. Okay. All right. Oh, that's right. All right, we stand adjourned. Thank you.